many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. We are going to go over the shooting today a little bit, being the main headlines. But I also want to cover the stock market because right now they're claiming stock market skyrocket, up 600 points. Stock leap about 4% in recovery, best day since 2011. After three major days that it fell. And I want to point out that this whole shooting incident can also play into this because that was the news. It really was. That covered a lot of the news. It really distracted people, and then also made people look into, they're going to try to crack down on stuff more. So, technology might, tech might play something in this. And, but I don't think it's something that will last. I have one here from CNBC. U.S. stocks shot higher on Wednesday, rebounding from 6 consecutive days of declines that pushed the major averages into correction territory. In addition to an oversold bounce, some analysts also attributed the gains to comments from the Fed's William Dudley that a September rate hike looks less compelling and a strong, durable goods report. The major averages closed about 4% higher for their best day since 2011, with the S&P 500 rising out of correction territory. The index fell into correction during Monday's sell-off. Among the 10 S&P 500 sectors, tech, financial, healthcare, consumer, discretionary, and staples are all out of correction territory. The companies in the index gained about $640 billion in market capitalization on Wednesday, but have still lost $268 billion in capitalization this week and are down $1.3 trillion over the last week and a half. I have another one here from MoneyCNN.com. Dow zooms up 619 points, third biggest gain ever. And it says greed made a comeback on Wall Street. The Dow raised 619 points higher on Wednesday. Its most impotent point gain since, excuse me, the 2008 financial crisis. The huge rally represents a rebound following 6 days of dramatic selling that was driven by serious concerns about how China's slowing economy will impact the rest of the world. The S&P 500 soared 3.9% on Wednesday, its biggest one-day percentage gain in 2011. The Nasdaq surged 4.2% higher. The Dow's point gain was third largest in history. We were sorely in need of a pop after that drop, said Sam Stovall, chief investment strategist at S&P Capital IQ. And again, we've had a lot of distraction today to loud there, which you've heard some of them even talk about it, that they are trying to rally, basically trying to convince people not to leave. And I really think that with this whole shooting thing and the media just grabbing a hold of it and so much being centered around it, I think it really brought a distraction and allowed for that rally. Well, it wasn't even a rally. It was kind of more, they weren't watching the investment news. They were more watching what was going on with the whole shooting incident today. And what do you get for evening news? A little bit of talk about that, and then talking about how great the stock market has rebounded. But really, we need to be very cautious about allowing that type of propaganda to go, oh, yeah, we should trust in the stock market. And we definitely know that the stock market does not reflect what the economy is actually doing, which I think when you see attempts at corrections, it's trying to bring the stock market back down to where we really are. And I think that's where we've had some issues. But I want to play a Ron Paul Liberty report. Give me a second here. And this was posted yesterday, so this was before the rebound, but I still want to cover this. It says, markets crash is China to blame. And let me go ahead and get this up. Here we go. So, Ron Paul Liberty report from yesterday.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, nice to see you.
Happy Tuesday, Dr. Paul.
Well, it's Happy Tuesday for some people. The market's coming back again, they claim, but I guess we'll wait and see. Somebody has to sort this all out. You know, yesterday there was some sorting out because, when a campaign's going on, the pundits like to ask, what the candidates are thinking. They didn't ask all the candidates what they thought was the problem, but they did ask a few of the candidates, and we want to get into that. But we have to sort of think about what's going to happen too.
I think what a lot of people are worrying about. We had the show yesterday in the midst of this crash and slight recovery, then crash again, and now that things seem to be coming up roses, I would imagine people are thinking, well, what's Ron Paul talking about? Everything seems to be okay. What would you say to those people?
Well, the one thing that I do not do is trade hourly or daily with stocks. I'm a long-term fundamentalist, but I still like to watch it. And what should happen? We have a lot of downturns, which we predicted all along would happen. There should be no surprises. But today shouldn't be a surprise. It'll be a surprise if the market today ends down a little bit. But it's up significant, but for the month and the weeks, these kind of corrections are rather typical. So I don't think it means one thing. The fundamentals aren't being changed, and I think the situation of monetary policy and spending and debt and protectionism, all that stuff is still going to be there, and they haven't addressed that. But I found it interesting. I think you did read a little bit about the comments made by some of the candidates. They didn't interview everybody. I didn't see them interviewing a certain senator from Kentucky, and I know what he might understand and understands about the business cycle. But nevertheless, they did go to a few individuals, and it was sort of fascinating. Because the one headline says, as market tumbles, GOP 2016 hopefuls blame China. China, they're the culprit. And Obama. Obama, of course, if you're a Republican, you blame Obama for everything. And you don't look at the facts. But in blaming Obama, one of the reasons they blamed Obama was there was too much debt. And with the Republican Congress, and I thought all spending and taxes was supposed to be the congressional responsibility. So I imagine there's a few of those comments that found interest in what you were thinking about it.
It was very interesting. The populism on the campaign trail, I guess, is to be expected, but I think it does have some dangerous implications. I think Trump is the one that everyone looks at, and he had, I think he's trying to be cute, saying that when the Chinese president comes, no state dinner, hand him a Big Mac, and let's get down to business. But on a more serious note, he suggested that we need to put tariffs on all Chinese products and prepare for a trade war.
Yeah, that is very dangerous because it's terrible for the economy. And trade wars, and they do this in different ways. And China, it's in some ways, are participating in that because they work with currencies. Rather than put on direct tariffs, they manipulate currencies. But it's not like China's the only one. I mean, the United States does it all the time. I mean, we manipulate our currencies, but the currency manipulation, the tariffs, the sanctions that are being put on, it causes friction. It's exactly opposite of what free market advocates propose, and that is what the founders believed in: trade with people, and have friendship with people. Not saying insulting presidents that are coming to the country. Oh, you're coming here to talk about business. Oh, we'll give you a Mac hamburger, yeah. And this guy's supposed to be serious and. And he said, well, we need tariffs. Well, I'll tell you what, those are dangerous things because as many of us know, and you work very hard on the foreign policy issue, so often it does lead to something more than just a trade war.
Sure, you ratchet up the tensions and, for example, the dispute over these islands or something can be a spark. Wasn't it the U.S. trade policies with Japan in World War II that led to a lot of tension?
That's
or
right.
Before World War II that led to a lot of tension?
Yeah, we put on strong enough restraints on their capital flows that they were canceled out of their oil, and it was like 4 or 5 months before Pearl Harbor. But you're not allowed to say that because it's unpatriotic if you try to understand what trade wars actually do. But Walker was interviewed, and he was one that said we ought to cancel that meeting. The president shouldn't meet with Xi because China manipulates their economy. Shock. Oh, yeah, they buy stocks. Oh, no, not in America. We would never do that.
No QEs.
No QEs. But what about Fiorina? She's supposed to be the business person and would maybe come up with a more free market answer, but I didn't find it in anything that she said.
Well, what she said is vague, but also I think dangerous. She said we need to put pressure on China. But what does that mean? What does it mean to put pressure?
Yeah, it's pretty vague, but it's threatening. And her one statement was, sure, China goes ahead and they do this and they raise millions of Chinese out of poverty. She recognized that and said that happened. Oh, but it was at the expense of the violation of civil liberties of the individual Chinese. And they're not connected, but it's a true statement. Yes, they violate civil liberties, but what does this country do? I mean, at the same time, we're living on borrowed money, printed money, all kinds of manipulation and bailing out the rich. At the same time, we have NSA spying on every American, and we lose, our privacy and our rights here at home constantly. So, to find a country that has some infractions, yes, we can note it. But to pretend that we can change it or pretend that we're saints is rather annoying. Do you think our relationship all of a sudden improved with China? No, they don't even want it to improve, and they want to blame. And they claim that you can't trust the Chinese because they're not wise enough to intervene in a proper way. That only Americans know how to intervene in the economy.
Someone like Huckabee shows a fundamental lack of understanding about the concept of trade. He said it's time to build our economy, not China's, as if trade is a zero-sum game where they get everything and we get nothing.
Right, and what's going on today is rather predictable. If one were more honest on the short run, not on the long run, but on the short run, China has been a great deal of help for us. We've been able to get away with exporting our inflation. If we weren't the country that issued the reserve currency of the world and people didn't take our currencies, this would have ended a lot sooner, like Zimbabwe. But China, has been willing to take our dollars. We print them out of thin air. We pass them out, then we buy stuff, which is condemned by Trump. And so the standard of living for poor people go up because we buy clothes and shoes and everything else, maybe 1/10 of what they would pay if they forced everybody to make them in the United States. So they do this, and a lot of dollars leave the country, and the Chinese end up with $1.4 trillion. But instead of waiting to see the businessman who gets that money spend it back in here, the government takes it and monetizes it. So we print the money, and the debt is monetized by foreign governments. And what do they finally do? That means the money supply grows in China, which causes malinvestment, causes bubbles in stock markets and everything else. But what happens to the money that was sent over there? Well, the Chinese government then buys treasury bills. So you say, well, that's good. Absolutely, it's good for us on the short run, but it encourages us to run up debt. And so it's a machine that's been going on. The bubble keeps building. It's a dollar bubble, and but to turn it around and have headlines that say, well, yesterday, and all this collapse of the economy and the collapse of the stock market is China's fault. Yes, they're far from a perfect economy, and they're not free market people. I'm not sure too many Chinese economists have heard of von Mises, but nevertheless, it is so much of a stretch for us to have presidential candidates saying, well, it's the Chinese fault, and they ought to eat more hamburger, and we're not going to treat them to a steak dinner, and they're not smart enough how to regulate the economy, and they do it at the expense of civil liberties. We should be concerned about those things. We should be concerned about our healthy economy, but we certainly should be concerned about our civil liberties as well.
You were talking about debt earlier, and I think this is probably a tie with Trump, but I would guess it almost takes the cake, and that's Chris Christie, where he says, the debt has been given to us in a large measure by the Chinese. The Chinese gave us our debt.
Yeah, well, I think we had to buy stuff. They foolishly gave us products, and we gave them a paper money. And of course, we have a debt, and they give us money back. But that's hardly fair to say they gave us our debt. It was our spending. It's our government spending, corporate spending. But those things are happening in China, too, because Austrian economists have been warning about China, too, about, inflation from the inflation of the money supply. Their money supply goes up because they monetize this debt. And it was predictable that their stock market and everything else would have to have a correction. And it's going to be a worldwide correction. It's just not going to be in China. You can't blame just China. And you can't blame just Obama. I mean, sure, he's a big government person, but are his economic policies a whole lot different than the Republican policies? I mean, this whole thing, it's Obamacare. Yeah, but Republicans have no intention on repealing Obamacare. And when Republicans have been in charge, They've expanded government medicine, expanded, education at the national level. So hypocrisy is something that can become rather annoying at times.
I wanted to ask you about this one part, because this is the actual article that you pointed out earlier as markets tumble, GOP's candidates blame China. But this is within the article, and to me it strikes me as an editorialization demonstrating an absolute lack of understanding of how economies work. And I'll just quote you a little bit from it. China's troubles raise doubts about whether its policymakers have the tools to keep their economy growing at a healthy pace.
Yeah, what they're referring to is that we have the tools and we're smart and we rescued our economy in 08 and 09. The tools were print, spend, debt, regulate, and continue to expand, the total debt. And they're claiming they're not smart enough to have these tools, but they're already involved in that. They've been doing that kind of stuff already, and they've been and some of our candidates condemn them for buying stocks. What do you think we've been doing? How much does the American taxpayer owe? We might not have a legislation by the Congress and the Treasury's holding stock certificates, but how many trillions of dollars were used to buy a bad mortgage debt? So we didn't do anything to correct the problem. And that's answer infers that we have the tools and the wisdom to do this, and all we do is make a bigger and bigger bubble, which we're capable of doing because we can print the reserve currency of the world. And as long as we're able to print the reserve currency, the bubble will get bigger and bigger. And eventually it will affect not just the stock market. It's going to eventually affect the bond market, because it's when the Treasury bills act like junk bonds, the ball game is over. It nearly was totally destructive in 1979 when interest rates went to 21%. Right now, interest rates are abnormally and historically low, but that doesn't mean things can't shift, because we've already seen cities and municipalities and some states are in bad trouble, and there's no way they're going to pay all these bills. Productivity is not going up, and the workforce is as low as ever, and we are facing a consequence which is going to involve not only the American people and American stock markets, but the worldwide. It's going to be a problem. It's going to be more Greek conditions coming up, and we ought to prepare ourselves for that. But for me, the only way we can prepare for this is do our best to stop it, but accept the fact that the politicians aren't going to change it. I think the statements made by the candidates right now indicate that they don't have the biggest idea what's going on, and they are not willing to bite the bullet. Now you say, well, what do you mean? Trump, he's a tough guy. He's going to do it. But he's a protectionist. He's going to make it worse if he puts on tariffs and takes charge of the economy. We want the people to take charge of the economy, which means that we have to get rid of the Federal Reserve, get rid of the income tax, let the people go to work, let the people keep what they earn, don't violate their civil liberties, don't violate their privacy, and don't get involved in other nations. Then we could be free and prosperous. The world would accept this because it would be such a system that they would want to emulate. That would make the difference. But unfortunately, right now it's not on the horizon, but it still can come if we have enough people who understand the difference of where we should go and what we have, because there has to be a replacement. We can't linger like this. We could linger in total poverty and dictatorship for a while, but let's hope the American people will never accept that. And we have to have the type of reforms in this system where we talk about free markets and property rights and sound money. That would be the solution to all this, rather than saying, oh, it's China's fault. We'll give them a hamburger and solve their problem. That won't be the answer. The answer can be found in liberty. Please come back soon to the Liberty Report. Thanks for tuning in.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Go check it out and subscribe. Okay. Give me a second here. had one here from Truth Media. If it's going to load right. Now, there's a lot of stuff that Trump says that is really frightening, really. And I've expressed my concern over his nationalism to the point that it still will turn into that kind of social nationalism. And a lot of his rhetoric sounds similar to things that maybe you would have heard out of Hitler's mouth. Even though I don't think he's that type of intention person, I think his ego would allow for that type of stuff to happen, and evil men run amok under his leadership in a whole different way. Kind of thing like, microchipping everyone, that way we can make sure that the legals are out. But he does bring up legit problems with immigration and how it's being used. And I'm a person that is for open borders, just not the way that governments operate open borders. They have always got an agenda to gain more power, more control, and take your wealth. Therefore, I trust no open borders under government control. But I have one here, reality check. Donald Trump may be right on birthright citizenship. And you can find this again, truthmedia.com. Let me cue this up here. Now, when it comes to the economy, I completely disagree with the tariffs. I used to be that guy. I used to be the guy that said, if we just put tariffs on them, then, it wouldn't be cheaper for them. Well, no, but it would also be more expensive for you. And will your pay go up enough to compensate for that? Probably not. Definitely when you look at the whole tariff thing and you trying to export goods, working in factories, knowing that we do a lot of business overseas shipping stuff. So if we raise the tariff, they're going to raise the tariff, which would actually bring production down. Well, we have more domestic relying on us, so it might go back up, but it's not going to be a better situation. It's just kind of trading. Well, half of my business is done, domestically, and the other half is foreign. And the companies that buy off me buy half of what they need off me, half of it from foreign, just because they can get those certain products cheaper. Well, then, that business exchange, well, now they're buying it off of me, but I'm not selling to those foreign countries anymore. So it's kind of just even exchange, and you're not producing and selling more, and you're also limited in your market. Therefore, you end up falling into that slump where, well, look at the price of a brand new vehicle. Look at the price of a brand new house. You're not going to be in a better position to get those. And really, we could get actually in depth into that whole system. But I want to kind of cover this about immigration. And here it is from Ben Swan, truthmedia.com. Reality check from CBS 446.
The two words that have lit up the political world over the past week, right there. Anchor babies. Donald Trump says he is not only going to round up and deport 12 million people, but he's going to change the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. So how much of this could actually happen under President Trump? Tonight, we're giving his claims a reality check.
A woman is going to have a baby. They wait on the border. Just before the baby, they come over to the border. They have the baby in the United States. We now take care of that baby. Social Security, Medicare, education. Give me a break.
Yeah, Donald Trump has been making his case. The claim that women who come to the United States and have a baby here on U.S. soil in order for their child to become a U.S. citizen are not actually protected by the Constitution. What's more, those babies, called anchor babies, he says are actually not citizens, and he also claims some very, very good lawyers would agree with him. So what does the 14th Amendment actually say? Well, the 14th Amendment came into being after the Civil War as Congress passed in 1868 this amendment to enfranchise former slaves in the South. It says this, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. In 1898, the Supreme Court ruled that the amendment, in clear words and in manifest intent, includes the children born within the territory of the United States of all other persons except children born to enemy aliens and diplomats of whatever race or color domiciled within the United States. So clearly stated, if you are born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen, right? Well, actually, believe it or not, Donald Trump may be onto something.
I don't think they have American citizenship. And if you speak to some very, very good lawyers, and I know some would disagree, but many of them agree with me, you're going to find they do not have American citizenship.
A reality check here. Under the 14th Amendment, not everyone born within the United States has citizens' birthright. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 of the U.S. Constitution says this: Congress shall have the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. So the question, can Congress, without changing the Constitution, define who is a citizen and who is not? Yes, because they have. See, in 1868, when the 14th Amendment was passed, it excluded Native Americans because they would have allegiance, it said, to their own native nation. But in 1923, Congress, without changing the Constitution, redefined requirements for citizenship by extending citizenship to Native Americans. So what you need to know is that, yes, Trump is right that birthright citizenship is not guaranteed under our Constitution. But where he is wrong, that the children of immigrants who are already here are not really citizens, because under the current understanding of the 14th Amendment, they have been granted citizenship. In order to change that, Congress would have to attempt to strip citizenship from millions of Americans, something Congress would not do. And even if they did, that would have to go through the courts, and almost certainly the United States Supreme Court would not allow that to happen. That's Reality Check. Tonight, let's talk about that on Twitter.
So even though it's not in the Constitution, the authority has been basically granted to Congress. And they have made that okay. And they can change it, and they can change it back, and they can change it again, and they can change it back. But likelihood of that happening, never. But, you know, again, I really believe Donald is a sideshow to really distract people. Like I've said, you know, you haven't heard really anything about Rand Paul since Donald Trump started running after the first debate, which it took Rand Paul initiating, you know, listen, I'm not going to be sitting here on the sidelines while this comedian up here. And, you know, yes, he might spout a lot of things that really hit the nerve of us. And he tapped into something, but I think he is extremely naive and egotistical and narcissistic, and I think that he would not be beneficial at all. And to another, candidate, potential candidate, give it a second here. 46% of likely voters think Hillary Clinton should suspend campaign. This is from Truth and Media again. Truthandmedia.com, formerly benswan.com. The snowballing scandal surrounding Hillary Clinton's use of private email servers to conduct official business while serving as Secretary of State is starting to seriously hamster her bid for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2016, according to an August 23rd through 24th Rasmussen reports nationwide telephone poll of 1,000 likely American voters. The poll asked, should Hillary Clinton suspend her campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination until all the legal questions about her use of private email server during her time as Secretary of State are resolved? 46% of those polled said that Clinton should suspend her campaign. 44% said that she should not, and 9% listed themselves as unsure. Even 1 in 4 Democrats, 24%, agree that the frontrunner for their party's nomination should suspend her campaign for the time being. But that compares to 73% of Republicans and 46% of voters not affiliated with either major party. You can read the poll summary. Another Monmouth University poll conducted between July 21st and August 2nd asked, do you think Hillary Clinton's emails should be subject to criminal investigation for potential release of classified material or not? 52% of registered voters in that poll said that Clinton's email scandal deserves a criminal investigation. Another Rasmussen reports poll of 1,000 likely voters taken August 13th through 15th found that 45% of participants believe that Hillary's use of private email to conduct business as Secretary of State is a serious scandal. And it goes on, but there's so much scandal around her. Can you really take her as a serious candidate? And I think anybody that says they can, I think is not using their brain, misguided or miseducated. And I think freedom allows people to free their mind, but it's up to them to let go of these preconceived notions of why we need authority. I had one guy go, well, you know, we need cops because people are going to break in your house. I said, so the cops going to stop them from breaking in your house? Well, no, but, you know, do they usually get your stolen goods back? Well, you know, it depends. Yeah, so if your TV's stolen, do they usually get that back? If they don't pawn it, that's about the only way they get caught usually is when they pawn them. Do they stop the rapists from breaking in and raping? You've actually seen clips where, oh, we don't have an officer in the area. And that was a woman calling about her ex trying to get in. I said, you know, what do you prefer? You know, do you prefer wait for the cop to get there to rescue you, or would you want to try to protect yourself, fight back, prevent them from coming in? And, you know, you start to trigger something in people's minds, and they actually start thinking. And then, of course, being Hillary Clinton with her ideology, this loads. Okay. This one from Infowars.com. Clinton exploits Virginia shooting to call for gun legislation. Attacking the Second Amendment is a major component of campaign. This might take a second here. Within hours of the fatal shooting in Virginia of two television station employees, presidential candidate Hillary Clinton called for anti-gun legislation. Heartbroken and angry, we must act to stop gun violence, and we cannot wait any longer, praying for the victims' families in Virginia. Attacking the Second Amendment is a major component of Clinton's campaign. I will do whatever I can. I am not afraid of this fight. I am not backing off from this fight because it has gone way too far in one direction, and we need to get back to some balance, she told an audience of college students in Las Vegas recently. On Wednesday, Clinton ally Connecticut Governor Daniel P. Malloy criticized Bernie Sanders for voting against the Brady Handgun Violence Protection Act. Bernie Sanders is no progressive when it comes to guns. Malloy said, Democrats will use a tragic shooting in Virginia to renew calls for draconian gun legislation. Following the 2013 defeat in the Senate of legislation calling for background checks, Obama and the Democrats have pushed hard to kickstart the issue. The White House admitted using executive authority to restrict access to guns, and Obama declared his commitment to imposing gun laws, including requiring background checks for sales online and gun shows. The Obama administration has reacted to the incident under the banner of Gun Violence Code for Anti-Gun Legislation. Reuters Politic Twitter breaking White House spokesman says shooting a Virginia journalist, another example of U.S. gun violence becoming all too common. And that's that article there. And they got quite a bit of coverage of this. You can also find stuff on Drudge. Give me a second here. Okay, I'm just going to get off there. I have one here from Breitbart.com. Black gay reporter murders straight white journalist. Media blamed the gun. On Wednesday, America met a deeply evil human being, Buster Lee Flanagan II, also known as reporter Bryce Williams. Williams murdered two people while they were live on air on WDBJ in Virginia. Reporter Allison Parker and cameraman Adam Ward. After the murders, he went on the run, and while he was on the run, he tweeted out his rationale for the killings, accusing Parker of making racist comments and Ward of going to HR on me after working with me only one time. He then posted a video to his Facebook and Twitter pages of himself shooting both at point blank range. Williams is black, Parker and Ward were white. Williams is gay, Parker and Ward were straight. None of which would be relevant, except that Williams specifically cited his identity as a factor in the killings. In a 23-page rambling letter sent to ABC News, Williams wrote that the Charleston church shooting in June should have provoked a race war. Why did I do it? I put a deposit for a gun on 6/19/15. The church shooting in Charleston happened on 6/17/15. What sent me over the top was the church shooting. You want a race war? Deleted? ? Bring it, then you white. Deleted. According to ABC News, he claimed he had suffered racial discrimination, sexual harassment, and bullying at work, that he had been attacked by black men and white females, and that he had been attacked for being gay black man. Williams marinated in his self-appointed victimhood status. He filed a lawsuit against his Tallahassee, Florida employer, WTWC. A lawsuit settled out of court. He filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission against WDBJ after his firing. A complaint the EEOC dismissed. According to WDBJ station manager Jeff Marks, Williams was a unhappy man with a reputation as someone who had been difficult to work with, looking out for people to say things that he would take offense to. Had a white straight man killed a black man, released first-person tape of the shooting, and then unleashed a manifesto about being victimized by affirmative action and anti-religious bigotry from homosexuals, the media would never stop covering the story. They'd be eager to report that shooter's motives with all the attendant politically correct huluba about the racism and homophobia of the United States more broadly. We would hear about white supremacy, reprehensible Black Lives Matter leader DeRay McKinson actually jumped the gun thinking the shooter was white and tweeted, "Whiteness will explain away nearly anything." We would hear execrations of the Republican presidential candidates for their failures to stand with the Black Lives Matter movement and their opposition to same-sex marriage. And it goes on, but again, you know, I've said this before, it really doesn't matter. The problem is we allow the it was a black person, it was a white person rhetoric to still remain in our reporting. Even if you're trying to point out that, you know, this wasn't a white person that killed black people, it was actually a gay black person that killed white straight people. It doesn't help. Why? Because everywhere you look, they're reporting it like this, you know, when it comes to the right-leaning. And then the left-leaning guys and the progressives, they're using it for, you know, this is why we need gun control. None of them are really hitting the factor that we got, you know, crazy, sick human beings, and they will find a way to do crazy, sick things to people. And everybody has the right to self-defense. You have a right to defend your family and protect your loved ones. So, you know, the government doesn't stop that. The government doesn't stop the crazy people. You know, there's reports of people using knives and forks and going around stabbing people and killing people. Get someone with a razor in a small area, it's just as dangerous. You know, knowing a little hand-to-hand combat disarming someone with a weapon in close range, I would probably actually feel a little bit safer doing that than disarming maybe a guy with a couple razor knives, some X-Acto blades or something in both hands. I don't know if I would feel comfortable disarming that person quite as much as I would someone close range with a firearm. Okay. I have another clip I wanted to get to if I can find it here. Just a second. Sorry guys, everything seems to want to slow down here. We'll get it back up. Okay, I'm going to play part of this. I'm going to play about a half hour of this clip. It's not quite an hour long, but it is quite a long way. But this is about socialism. This Jeffrey Tucker, Liberty Classics, brought to you by Jeffrey Tucker and Liberty.me. That's why it was taking a minute to come up. Okay, here we go.
Welcome, Liberty Meers. I'll type in the chat window here.
Give me a second here. I want to redo this. Okay, now we can get this back up here. We should be good to go.
Welcome, Liberty Meers. I'll wait just a second. Let's see. I'll type in the chat window here. Okay. Let me just say then at the outset that good. Okay. Let me just say at the outset that any questions you have, I think I'm prepared to open up to look at them in the chat window, and we can discuss things if you'd like to. First of all, let me apologize for my bright red face. Concerned about vitamin D deficiency. I went outside in the sun today. I thought, well, maybe it's time to get a little bit of sun, I mean, you have to do that from time to time. It's good for your health. And then I was out there maybe, 30, 45 minutes, something like that. And it was like, being in an oven or something. It was just just insane. Just how much the sun just like instantaneously baked my face. I guess I hadn't been out enough or something, but it's just crazy. I mean, I look at myself going, oh my God, you know. So I don't know. I think it was like 100 degrees out there or something today, but pretty insane. So I've got some hydrocortisone. I'll put it on, and I'm sure I'll be all fine in the morning. But for now, I'm a little bit toasted, a little bit disoriented. So Memorial Day weekend, right? Okay, so tonight we're talking about absolutely one of my favorite books in the history of the world called Socialism by Ludwig von Mises. And I would like to do it not just by talking about socialism alone, which I've done actually many times in the course of these seminars. Everybody knows that it's one of my favorite books. In fact, I think it's far more significant a work than people get a bit credit for being. One of the problems is that people typically regard this book as nothing but an attack on socialism. And so if you already disagree with socialism and you think it's terrible, there's no reason for you to read this book. What people don't understand is that actually, in fact, Mises offers a full-blown theory of politics and a full theory of social life and the organization of society within this book. And it's an extremely advanced theory. There's some points that he makes in the book that he never returns to again in his career. And I have no idea why that is. I would say in some sense it's the most speculative, most, how do I put it? It's the book that he was a very young man when he wrote it. So he was very intense about all the newest scholarship, and he writes it with a level of passion that's actually quite extraordinary from the beginning to the end. As I say, I'm not sure why this is, but he offers a series of insights concerning social life, the family, the origin of property, the origin of the state, the nature and structure of human association, that for some reason he never really returns to. In fact, this book offers, I think, Mises's really only full-blown treatment of the topic of the origin of property that he does in any of his work. The rest of it, he just takes private property for granted, describing its utility, but never returns to this question about where it came from. And herein he also deals with the origin of the state and really wonderfully fundamental questions. I mean, there's a sense in which if he had never written anything other than this book, he also deals, extensively with things like, family, human sexuality, psychoanalysis and psychology, religion's basis. He has some very speculative thoughts about religious doctrine, about religious mysticism, syndicalism, intellectuals and socialism, just wonderful, sweeping stuff. It'll keep you busy for weeks, really, this book. I was about to say, if he had never written anything but this book, if it had been the culmination of his career, and he had gone on, and he had died or something, or retired, then it would have been enough to establish his name in the history of the social sciences. Of that, there's absolutely no question. In some sense, I think it's a kind of a tragedy that this book has been overshadowed by things like Human Action, because it's that level of book. I mean, the upshot of the book is that, of course, that it gives a devastating, sweeping, all-encompassing case against socialism that you read and you never really recover from. Now, I'm assuming most of us are not socialists. We think socialists are ridiculous and they're gone from the world today. So maybe that would make you think you don't need to read the book. But in Mises's day, almost everybody in academia was a socialist, at the University of Vienna. So he was really taking on the establishment in this big way. And he shocked many people. F.A. Hayek writes about what it was like for him, who was just basically a run-of-the-mill socialist like everybody else. And he read the book and he never quite recovered from it. He rejected socialism and never returned to it again. And it made a whole generation feel deeply uncomfortable, actually, with their preset ideological structures. And, Mises had also made himself kind of through this book an enemy of a vast number of people. There were three main groups that he had become the enemy of. One was the professional philosopher class and the economists, the intellectuals, the academic elite in all over Europe, in the UK and the US. But that was his primary target, of course, because he himself was an intellectual. Secondly, by taking on religion and the socialist mystics and the people who dream of creating a new world through fanciful imaginings of a spiritual nature, he took them on. Particularly, he took on early trends in Catholic and Protestant forms of socialism in the 1920s. So he made himself an enemy of the clerical class of the day. And then thirdly, he took on states and statesmen and politicians who, were fond of whipping up dreams of pure democracy, the abolition of private property and socialist revolution as a means of giving themselves power. Mises saw straight through this and took it on directly, and really showed that socialism was really just a kind of for this class of citizens, just a masquerade, a kind of just a pretext for dictatorship. So those are the three groups that he took on: the philosophers, the religious mystics, and the tyrants. And he did it in an all-encompassing way by laying out a full theory of society, the division of labor, the origin of property rights, the origin of the market economy, the workings of the market economy, justification of the family, which of course every socialist at the time, was convinced that the family was an evil thing that had to be abolished, as Marx said in the Communist Manifesto. And this is very common. So he came to the defense of the family as an institution, and went into great depth on drawing mainly from the work of Freud, actually, in defense of gender roles as an extension of sexual biological realities, and then went on to attack every conceivable form of socialism, and just the book was amazing, and it blew people away. It was debated for something like 20 years. In particular, the thing that came under most intense debate after the book came out was his claim that socialism was unrealistic, literally, in the sense that it was inconsistent with the realities that were necessary for a civilized life. And his argument went like this. In order to have rational economic calculation, you had to have the ability to assess the opportunity costs of all the uses of resources. Whether some resource, whether steel or oil or paper or labor, should be used for this task or for that task. There's nothing about the nature of the world that really necessarily tells you whether or not that's true. The central planners don't automatically know, what the answer to that is. The answer is provided to us by the system of profit and loss. When things begin to lose money, when whole industries and sectors begin to lose money, that's a signal that the resources are being incorrectly used. When they make money, it's a sign that they're being used right. But in order to calculate profit and loss, you have to have prices. Prices are a way of aggregating the prevailing realities concerning human values and relative scarcities of resources. But in order to have accurate prices, you had to have real life trading. You had to have people actually exchanging things, buying and selling things from each other in order to establish real existing prices. But you can't buy and sell, you can't trade in absence of private property. So that's the way his chain of logic ran. So in absence of private property, then you don't get accurate prices. In absence of accurate prices, you have nothing you can use to calculate profit and loss. Without profit and loss signals, you lack the ability to calculate rationally. And without the ability to calculate rationally, you're just randomly assigning resources, to whatever kind of based on political priorities or whatever, leading to total economic collapse, irrationality, and universal disaster. In fact, he predicts in here that under full-blown socialism, which he thinks is actually impossible, civilization would die out, very quickly. And any attempts to move towards socialism move us away from prosperity, rationality, efficiency towards inefficiency, statism, and decivilizaation. That's the way he argued. And it's quite a devastating challenge because it said literally to the socialists, you can dream whatever you want. You can have all the high-flying theories you want, but in the end, you've got to figure out a way to make an economy actually function like an economy. And without private property, there is no economy. There's just none. You just have dictators randomly shuffling resources around. The socialists and the free market people debated this subject for essentially 25 years between 1922 when this book came out and the late 1940s. And ironically, it was widely assumed within the literature that Mises had lost the debate in favor of the so-called market socialists who imagined they could make up phony prices to substitute for this problem. Oscar Longa very famously said that he should erect a statue to Mises in Poland because it was Mises that alerted the socialists to the key problem of economic calculation in a socialist commonwealth and led them to come up with a brilliant solution. Of course, the solution is not a solution, as Mises said in many of his later writings. And that seems very obvious to me when you read Mises's one chapter in here on economic calculation, that he makes a very decisive case. So that's the most famous part of the book. But I don't think that it's all that's in this book. In this book, you'll find a complete social theory. As I've urged people on this program before, you'll be particularly interested in two chapters really like that appear in the first third of the book. One is on the origin of property, where you get a theory of property rights that is not based in sort of Lockean homesteading and the idea of mixing your labor with things. That's just not part of Mises' theory of property at all. You get a completely different origin of property. Growing out of, he sees property as a kind of as an invention, a technology that was established in order to solve the problem of privation. And I think, I've thought about this quite a lot, that Mises is actually realistically and historically correct about this. I mean, Mises was very interested in this book and always grounding his theory in historical reality and facts about the world. I mean, his big problem with socialism is it seemed like a far-flung fantasy based on essentially nothing, nothing realistic, nothing hard, nothing true. And he was always anxious in this book constantly to drive the readers back to the facts of reality, whether it's biological facts, certain physical facts about the scarcities in the world and the need for property to allocate resources, all kinds of historical experiences with socialism, all these things. He's constantly popping everybody's bubbles, right? I mean, this is what he's doing. He's blowing away fantasy and trying to ground your assessment of political and social realities in true functioning of the world, the way the world actually exists. So this is his sort of nonstop way that he argues from the beginning of the book all the way to the end. So what I'd like to do now is draw attention to a parallel, which I think is actually very close. And the parallel is with Aristotle's great book called Politics. And I don't know how many of you ever read it, but you can download it very quickly if you just Google Aristotle's Politics in EPUB. It will come up for you very quickly. It's a mighty and interesting and brilliant book. If you think Aristotle is intimidating or scary and you don't know anything about it, forget all that. Just go to go to the internet, download the EPUB, spend an evening with it. You'll find it absolutely fascinating. He's a very clear writer, very clear thinker. But there's so many parallels between Aristotle's politics and Mises' socialism. They overlay each other very, very well. Let me caution you here that, Mises is obviously a much better thinker. I don't know about thinker, but he was much more correct, right? So with Mises as a post-Enlightenment thinker, living in the age of science, early 20th century, advocate of universal human rights, universal enlightenment, democracy under the rule of law, an opponent of all forms of despotism, particularly slavery. So that was not, of course, true of Aristotle. Writing in the 4th century BC, this is a world of hierarchies, of state religions, of the subjugation of women, and of course, pervasive slavery and what we would call despotism and tyranny. So that was Aristotle's world. Aristotle doesn't go nearly far enough in taking on these institutions. There was no notion of this idea of realizable universal human rights, much less universal freedom or liberalism, really, what we call liberalism, which I would sum up as being the insight that society can manage itself without top-down control. Aristotle was not in any sense a liberal. To understand this, he lived many, many years before there was an enlightened understanding of the case against slavery, the case for universal rights, free speech, freedom of religion. None of this stuff was known in Aristotle's time. So when you take on Aristotle's politics, you need to understand that, or you won't make any sense out of his argument. So just put all your Enlightenment suppositions on the shelf and read it for what it is. So the downside, of course, of Aristotle is that he's a passionate defender of slavery. Thinks some people are born to be slaves, not so much out of biology, but just out of their station in life. There's a presumption throughout the book that women, should be subjugated, that they belong to the whole community as birthing creatures, belong to their husbands as wives, belong to their fathers as daughters, and should never mix in politics under any circumstances. There's a greater degree of toleration for women in this book than for slaves, just simply because women are necessary for procreation. There's also, there's plenty of egregious things in Aristotle. He doesn't understand the first thing at all about money making and wealth. He ridicules the idea of making money. He doesn't essentially think it's possible to make money. He's especially down on usurers and bankers and people who exchange money for profit. He condemns this as inherently unjust. He thinks that a much better, like his conception of economics is essentially, I guess you could say, the opposite of Mises's in a way. He thinks that to grow wealthy is evidence that you've acquired wealth from somebody else. So for him, there's always a fixed pie. There's a certain amount of wealth in the world, and the only way to really get it is by taking it from somebody else. Acquisition, he calls it. Acquisition ends up being basically his case for war, which he loves war. He thinks that all children ought to be prepared for war. They should be prepared to be soldiers. And that soldiering is a very high profession. The purpose of a war is to go out and get wealth. There's no conception of what it meant to have a rise in the economy. His conception of trading is funny. He sees it as just people moving stuff from here to there and back again. Just basically a pointless exercise. He condemns retail trade, by name, and has a very low regard for merchants, who he thinks are, more or less very low figures. Artisans, he doesn't have any regard for them. No surprise, special pleader Aristotle was, as was all the philosophers of the time. He thought philosophy was the most important profession. I mean, philosophers are more important than statesmen, or freemen, or the aristocracy. It's certainly more important than the merchants and the retailers and the users. Way down at the bottom, the average merchants. Women occupy a very strange place because they're very high regard for women as in their biological function, very low regard for women as citizens and contributors to the social order. Children are essentially have no rights whatsoever. Education, in Aristotle's view, is obviously the job of the state. And then, of course, slavery. He can't even imagine a world without slavery. In fact, time and again in this book, he makes arguments against things like, should philosophers learn to be artisans too? Should we trade professions? Should statesmen also be farmers? Should people move around and change jobs and move amongst the castes? And his answer to that is no, that's ridiculous, because once we start that kind of thing, then we're going to lose all distinctions between the types of people in society, and eventually we could even lose the difference between master and slave. And if that happens, I mean, Aristotle just takes it as a given that that's the end of the end. Without slaves, nothing can work. So you might be thinking, well, what is it you like about this book then? I mean, what's so great about it? Well, there are many things that are great about it. I mean, one is his method, which is very much like Mises's. He's very interested in the facts of reality. He's super attached to the idea of the real world. He won't have anything to do with mystical dreams and abstract, free-floating concepts and forms and reflecting on, what the heavens are saying to you or whatever. He was interested in logic and interested in reality, always. That's his method. And he never stops. I mean, from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, he's really focused on what is true around us. He never departs much from the realities of the real world, which is inspiring and great, and probably to that generation of intellectuals a blessed relief. The second great thing in the book is a thoroughgoing and beautiful and really in many ways inspired defense of, you guessed it, private property, just like Mises. So he's passionate about the subject. In fact, to me, this is the part of the book. There are many aspects of the book that are wonderful and egregious, but brilliant too. But this is probably the best part, his very powerful defense of property. Now, granted, his defense of property is compromised by the fact that he thinks that women, slaves, and children are themselves should be considered property. Okay, true. So he's confused, about what are the standards of what is and isn't property. Which, by the way, libertarians to this day are not entirely secure on that subject. What is and isn't property. So to some extent, I tend to, I think we should be somewhat forgiving of Aristotle in this respect, since most libertarians today don't even get this right, as far as I'm concerned. I'm speaking to those in the know over the ongoing disputes concerning intellectual property. So we can't get that right. We still don't have a good conception of what is property. But nonetheless, he defends the idea of private ownership in a very beautiful way. So he starts by saying, in absence of private ownership, we can never refer to things like my child, my mother, my father, my sister, my brother. The whole conception of what is mine gets cut out completely. Under collective ownership, there's no such thing as mine. So there's no such thing as individuality in absence of ownership. So we wouldn't even have the word my in our language. And I feel sure, actually, by the way, that Ayn Rand, who quite frequently credited Aristotle with many of her views. Took her position on ownership and individuality from Aristotle. I mean, I don't know this for sure, but he speaks very much in the vein that she's talked about. That in absence of private property, there's no sense of mine and yours, and I and you. The divisions between people, just gone completely. So there's that. Then he goes further to say that in absence of property, there can't be any such thing as giving to others. So if you don't own anything and nothing is really yours, you can't actually be benevolent to other people. You can't give them gifts. You can't take care of others. So in the absence of the physical possibility of being generous to other people, the generosity in spirit goes away completely. So benevolence is abolished, generosity of spirit is gone, and you reduce society to a sort of a very grueling state. I mean, this is Aristotle's prediction. And then he goes even further to say that in absence of private property, you won't have such things as love, since he says there's nothing that inspires a man or a person to love and care and to feel emotional attachments towards things like private ownership and privately owned things, private property. That this is what gives life to the human imagination. It's what gives us the desire to protect things and to care for them and to love them. So in absence of private property, Aristotle predicts there'll be a complete absence of love. So you can see here that there's a certain parallel in different forms, different times. I mean, these books are, essentially 2,300 years apart, right? But nonetheless, you have a kind of a parallel argument. Both of them very rooted in realities, both of them coming to the strong defense of private property, both predicting the calamitous results in absence of private property, and both taking on the enemies of private property in their day. So who were the enemies of private property in Aristotle's day? Well, basically it's the same people that Mises confronted. I mean, think about it, Aristotle's writing in the 4th century. So he's a student of Plato. Plato was an advocate of communism. Okay, now you can look at Plato's writings on collective ownership and communism and all the rest of it and say, oh, he was just being ironic. It's a reductio ad absurdum. He's just trying to get people to think, yada, yada, whatever. It's clear that Aristotle thought that Plato was a defender of complete communism in property and in families. Oh, I forgot one thing about Aristotle. He's a passionate defender of the private ownership of land, which he names in particular, the land as being privately owned. So anyway, so he cites Plato, his teacher, throughout in opposition to him on this subject. So whether you think Plato was playing games, or not, it doesn't really matter. Aristotle takes him for being basically a communist, advocating communist ownership of property, communist ownership of wives and children, communist ownership of land, collective ownership, central plan and dictatorship, top-down rule by philosopher kings, abolition of private life, which Plato saw was inconsistent with social harmony. So he thought that communism was the means towards social harmony. So it was Aristotle's burden to demonstrate, actually, that as well-intentioned as Plato might be, his whole scheme here would actually lead to massive social division, the abolition of benevolence, generosity, a culture of giving, and a culture of love and concern and caretaking. So that's the first group that Aristotle's taking on, are the philosophers, namely Plato, his great teacher, and his influence. He was very interested in wiping out the influence that Plato had in a rising generation of, proto-socialist philosophers. The second group, and I tried to look this up a little bit, but I came up a little bit dry, but so I can't really demonstrate this, but I'm just imagining the 4th century, in the religious sense, you had an official religion, the Roman religion, which nowadays is called paganism, but it was the official state religion, and it was stable, it was pious, they had their gods, there's a god for everything, there are temples all over the place, and everybody was required to worship it. And Aristotle himself was an advocate of pious adherence to this state religion. But, in this period, and I'm basing this partly on, what I know about religious history, but as in any period, there had to have been religious crazies running around all over the place, advocating every kind of mystical dream. I know for sure that 8 centuries later, there was madness all over the land. In fact, I'm quite certain that there's no period in history where there hasn't been religious madness of some sort loose on the land. So it had to be true in 4th century Greece too. People advocating communism as a form of spiritual purification. So there's a sense in which he was taking on, the religious mystics, the same as Mises did in the 1920s. And there's a third group, namely the would-be tyrants and statesmen, which are always threatening, and in politics at all times, but particularly in Aristotle's time, there's always despotism on the loose. So he hammers this point. So what do the despots want? Well, they want to abolish private property, not because they want to bring about universal peace, but because they want to put themselves in power. He warns specifically against sort of radically democratic ideas, because he thinks that would lead to a massive social chaos and massive theft of property. He warns against revolution because he says that quite often revolutions are fomented not really for the overthrow of despotism, but for the replacement of one form of injudicious, unjust leadership in favor of a kind of a dictatorship. That's what he thinks is always the result, or more or less often the result of revolution. So he's warning constantly about tyranny. In fact, if Aristotle believes that he has one theory in the book, it was an anti-tyranny book. How do you achieve a stable social order without tyranny? So he's taking them on directly and defending private property as a tool against the rise of tyranny. We don't need to go into what he calls tyranny. I mean, I think most of us would regard what Aristotle considered the ideal government as being a form of tyranny. Certainly, I think I would. But what he means by tyranny is really just a kind of a centralized system of one-man rule, where the law is entirely arbitrary, where the free men and the aristocracy do not have access to having any influence over the form of law in society. That would be for Aristotle tyranny. So you see what I'm driving at here. Oh, and by the way.
Okay, I'm going to stop right there. And when it comes to property rights, talking about property rights, talking about ownership, something that is the complete opposite from the socialist views. And, I kind of like to compare it with, you go out and get somewhat basically a newer car, might be a couple of years old or whatever, but you go out and get a newer car and it's in great shape, and how you treat it when you buy, you try to keep it clean and try to keep up on the oil changes, compared to when you go rent a car that's newer and you go beat the hell out of it, eat Cheetos. You kind of see a difference. You when you have ownership in something, you create a love for it. You create a bond with that thing, and you take care of it. That's where the ownership and He talks about without ownership, you don't have love. But this has kind of been the path that society's been on in a grand scheme of things, where families have been broken down. Instead of going in the direction of acceptance, it's more I'm this and I deserve more because you don't like me. And it's really gone overboard. But this is a really bigger scheme. I have one here that I can't even see where this is. August 7th on InfoWars. In September 2015, Agenda 21 will be transformed into the 2030 Agenda, which actually there's multiple names for it. 2020, 2030, and 2050 are multiple names that it's going by if you start looking at it actually being implemented at a local level. But it says here, if you don't like Agenda 21, then you're really not going to like the 2030 agenda. Next month, the United Nations is going to launch the 2030 agenda, a major conference that will be held from September 25th to September 27th in New York City. The Pope is actually traveling to New York to deliver an address which will kick off this conference. Unlike Agenda 21, which is primarily focused on the environment, the 2030 Agenda is truly a template for governing the entire planet. In addition to addressing climate change, it also sets ambitious goals for areas such as economics, health, energy, education, agriculture, gender equality, and a whole host of other issues. As you will see below, the global initiative is being called or being billed as a new universal agenda for humanity. If you are anything like me, alarm bells are going off in your head right about now. The new agenda is solidly rooted in a document known as Agenda 21 that was originally adopted by the United Nations back in 1992. The following comes from Wikipedia. The full text of Agenda 21 was made public at the UN Conference on Environment and Development, Earth Summit, held in Rio de Janeiro on June 13, 1992, where 178 governments voted to adopt the program. The final text was the result of drafting, consultation, and negotiation beginning in 1989 and accumulating at the 2-week conference. Since that time, Agenda 21 has been modified and amended numerous times. Noteworthy changes occurred in 97, 02, and 2012. But now the UN Sustainable Development Program is being given an entirely new name, and the scope of the agenda is being broadened dramatically. The following is what the official United Nations website has to say about it. The United Nations is now in the process of defining Sustainable Development Goals as a part of new Sustainable Development Agenda that must finish the job and leave no one behind. The agenda to be launched at the Sustainable Development Summit in September 2015 is currently being discussed at the UN General Assembly, where member states and civil society are making contributions to the agenda. Just a few days ago, the core document for the 2030 agenda was finalized. When what is in this document starts getting out, it's going to create a huge stir among Americans that are concerned about the ambitions of the globalists. The following comes from the preamble of this document. The agenda is a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. It also seeks to strengthen universal peace and larger freedom. We recognize that Extraditing or eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. All countries and all stakeholders acting in collaborative partnership will implement this plan. We are resolved to free the human race from the tyranny of poverty, and we want to heal and secure our planet. We are determined to take the bold and transformative steps which are urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable and resilient path. As we embark on the collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets which we are announcing today demonstrate the scale and ambition of this new universal agenda. They seek to build the Millennium Development Goals and complete what these did not achieve. They seek to realize the human rights of all and achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. They are integrated and indivisible and balance the three dimensions of sustainable development: the economic, social, and environmental. As you can see, this is not just a plan to fight climate change. This really becomes a blueprint for transforming global society. The core of the plan is set of 17 specific goals. Goal 1, end poverty, all its forms everywhere. 2, end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. 3, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages, meaning that they will have control over your kids and tell them what they can eat and what they can't. Ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. 6, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, which again means water rights. You'll be kicked out of anywhere that has water rights. Ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Meaning that if you don't have a job, they'll put you in a camp. Don't worry, you'll work. Build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. 10, reduce inequality within and among countries. 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. 14, conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, marine resources for sustainable development. 15, protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reserve land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. 16, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. At all levels. Strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. Many of those sound very good. After all, who wouldn't want to end poverty and halt biodiversity loss? But as you read through that list, ask yourself what forms of human activity would be excluded from it. Personally, I have a hard time coming up with much of anything. As I discussed earlier this week, the globalists want to use sustainable development as an excuse to micromanage the lives of every man, woman, and child on the entire globe. We are told that individual liberty and freedom are dangerous because when everyone just runs around doing whatever they want, it's bad for the planet. For example, one of the goals of the Sustainable Development crowd is to push the human population into giant megacities and to allow nature to recapture much of what was already been settled by humanity. The following map that comes from America 2050 is one example of what they want to do. A recent piece by Dave Hodges alerted me to this map, and it shows what the United States may look like in a few decades if the globals have their way. And you look at this map, and you see these pockets of where there will be people. And then large portions are just gray. Now you take this map, and this is the 2050 map, and you compare it to the old Agenda 21 from Rio de Janeiro and NAFTA and all this. Let me see if I can find this. It all plays a part. Give me a second here. Sorry, I'm having an issue here. I have to find the article somewhere else here. I thought I had it mapped out here, but apparently not. Okay. But you look at this map, and again, that one's from Infowars.com. In September 2015, Agenda 21 will be transformed into the 2030 Agenda. That's at Infowars.com. But there's also a map, and if you go to the unsolicitedopinion.com/maps, you can find a lot of links to a lot of information there. That's one place I found it. Canada Free Press had something on it. Soda Head had something on it, which Soda had a pretty good list. And that was Soda Head has Agenda 21 invaded your city yet? Here's a list of cities. And you take this list of cities, and these are cities that are they have adopted ICLEIS's Local Governments for Sustainable Program, which is a part of Agenda 21. I think it's UNICEF, or maybe not UNICEF. It might be a different United Nations group. But you take these cities that have signed on, and you take these maps, and you start looking at all of it. It makes sense. And then there was a page just created that I created for Northeastern Indiana. I tell you a lot of times about one of the cities that's nearby that is trying to become one of these big cities. They're trying to become a metropolitan area, a large metropolitan area, when they're not that yet. They're slowly becoming it. But they have something that they just joined, or made a plan for money that relates back to this whole Agenda 21, but they're calling it Road to 1 Million Plan. Well, when you go to the link for it, it actually goes to, what is it? Sorry, give me a second here. Try and remember the name of it. I think it's Vision 2020. And like I told you, it's they have multiple things for that. Hold on, give me a second here. Oh, sorry, my dog wanted in the studio. I had to let her in. She started crying. But it was Vision 2020, and they also call it Vision 2030, Metro Vision 2030, Visioning 2020, Visioning 2035. Your city might also call it a comprehensive plan growth plan or a land use plan. But you start looking into it, it all links back. And let me see what, yeah, we still have about 13 minutes. And what they're doing with this is they're trying to get this federal funding basically to take areas and turn them into these condos and these apartment buildings. And there's areas that I've told you about, the people that, pitting soil on their land because it's basically being washed away because of flooding from a creek that the county in that particular, area that this is all happening in. The county's been bought out by the city basically in this whole initiative. But they literally don't fix bad tiling and dammed up creeks, and when it floods out and people are trying to save their property, they've come in and said, no, it's wetlands, no, it's trees falling in the creek. Yeah, exactly, it's nature and it's wetlands. Now you can't do anything with your property. And they're like literally on this house being surrounded by floodwater half of the time because the county refuses to fix the creek, and if they try to do anything to fix the problem, they're messing with wetlands areas. And they're, creating these watershed areas. Basically, they'll put these signs up. All of a sudden it says watershed area. Now, all of a sudden, every time you try to do anything, you get these people showing up, I can't even remember who they said it was, the people that it happened to, but basically people showing up telling you that you're going to be fine, and every day it stays like this, you'll be fine, you shouldn't do that, you're in a watershed area, meaning it's basically you live on a nature preserve and we're allowing you to live here so far. So yeah, stop. Yeah, you can't till that and plant you a garden. No, you might mess up our wetlands. You can't put dirt down because it's being washed away because we won't fix the creek. Because, well, when the creek floods, guess what? That's wetlands now. It's not our neglect of taking care of these systems. They don't even show the creek there anymore. They don't even show that it goes under a road, even though they have a bridge with a pipe. So, it really becomes this thing where they're pushing people into these denser areas, and they're taking basically buying people's homes up and tearing them down and putting duplexes or apartments up. And I've been seeing extremely large apartments going up in that particular city and really densifying the city a lot. And we don't have a lot of time, but this is only 2 minutes. But this has also happened in East Portland. This has happened a lot of places, but there's a clip right here about it, and I'm going to play it. Give me a second here, though. Okay, here we go. Maybe. I'm going to try it one more time. Gotta try to skip the commercial again.
Nearly 20 years ago, Portland planners and elected officials created a sweeping plan to remake part of East Portland to ensure it added 14,000 new homes and 20,000 more residents. It was all part of a coordinated effort to build more homes in Portland and the suburbs without paving over farms and forests on the region's edges. Portland's Powhurst-Gilbert neighborhood served as the epicenter of that growth. Today, the Oregonian is providing an example of how it all happened, beginning with the city's annexation of Multnomah County land, to the Outer Southeast Community Plan, to zoning changes, and the resulting density we see today. Visit Southeast Boise Street near the corner of 116th Avenue, where there's a flag lot with a long driveway on 1 1/3 acres. In the early 1990s, when the land was under Multnomah County's jurisdiction, a developer could build one home for about every 4,000 square feet. In all, this flag lot on Southeast Boise Street could accommodate up to 15 units. In 1994, after the city of Portland annexed the land, officials increased the density to ensure that multifamily housing would be built. Now, a developer could construct about 19 units on the same piece of land. In 1996, as part of the Outer Southeast Community Plan, the city increased the zone density yet again. At the same time, officials offered developers the option to build even more units through something called a density bonus. Now, the same flag lot could hold 43 units. In 2002, a nonprofit developer came to town, snatched up the lot, and decided to build the Woodland Heights retirement community. But the rules didn't apply. City zoning regulations don't limit density for elderly housing projects, provided that they're built on land zoned for multifamily housing, which was the case for this flag lot. So when the development opened in 2004, it featured 58 one-bedroom units in a 4-story, 40-foot building. That's nearly 4 times the original amount authorized by Multnomah County. From the front door, the Woodland Heights retirement community is about 3/10 of a mile walk to the nearest big road, Southeast 122nd. There aren't any sidewalks along the way.
Now, some people might look at that and not think too much about it. But if you look at all these cities that are linked to this initiative that is being pushed as Agenda 21, now going to be 2030 or 2020, or and it goes by many different names when it's implemented at a local level. But just for sakes, Agenda 21. When you look at all of them, their main goal is to annex areas, create areas that are not to be touched, these green areas, and they are pushing for high density housing. And in that particular city here in Indiana, they are pushing for, we need to bring people back to downtown. What do you mean back to downtown? You have more people down there than you ever had. Back to downtown. What do you mean? What they're actually trying to do is create these large condos. And if you're from this area of town, we're talking about an area of town where $125,000 will get you, you know, a 2,500 square foot older home, not a brand new home, but an older home on a couple acres. In that city, you'd find one maybe on anywhere between, depending on how nice of a house, you know, how fancy of a house, between a quarter acre to an acre. Now they're trying to create all these condos downtown and around downtown. Guess what the price range is? $125,000. Basically to own a apartment. That's what I consider condos. You get the illusion that you own the apartment. It's kind of worse than a housing edition where they dictate what fence you can put up. No, this is even worse than that. Which is also making property in that area start going high. And what you're seeing are some of the wealthier people building these elaborate homes out in these areas on 4 or 5 acres, while people that were looking for homes for $125,000 are getting pushed either into those quarter acre lots, decent homes, but on a quarter acre in addition. No longer can they find the 2-3 acres with the decent home on it, because those are being bought up and the property sold for what the property was worth with that house on it. And this road to 1 million or whatever is supposed to basically start encompassing surrounding counties. Oh, yeah. So, you know, this is going on nationwide. So really check your local, if you don't live in a city, check the nearest big city or bigger city. See if they're a part of this. Again, you can find a list that was at SodaHead, and there's more information at the unsolicitedopinion.com/maps. So definitely check this stuff out. We are getting into a situation where I think that we're going to start seeing more implementation of these policies. And when you look at these maps of where people will be and where people won't be, and compared to these newer maps that are coming out of this Agenda 2030, they're pretty similar, but they're even more deep into where you're going to be put Thank you all for tuning in. I'll catch you this Friday. Stay tuned here on UCY.tv.